So we have it.
This is the most wonderful hall. I think it's the most beautiful hall I've ever spoken in.
It is stunning, really beautiful. There we go. And we've got some water in case we need it.
I was rather hoping, the last time I was in a big hall in Edinburgh, we were having a banquet after a conference. And I noticed that people were getting up off the table and going up to a certain end of the hall and coming back doubled up with laughter. And I couldn't understand what it was about, and one by one people were filing off and coming back doubled up with laughter. So eventually I got up and went and looked, and the whole hall was surrounded by busts of dignitaries, Lord Mayors, what do you call them, Lord Provost and things like that, and very, very dignified with beards and bald heads and things. And they got a bit muddled up, and so one of the dignitaries was put on the wrong plinth, and it said, Venus emerging from the bath.
Well, obviously we're going to chat about your book this evening. And I have to say, when I first heard the title of this book, I thought you'd turned your attention to the burgeoning field that I'm part of, so
I'm not
ancient
surprised,
DNA.
yes.
First thing that came to my mind. But that's not at all what this is about. So, and I love the very first sentence, because I think it's just beautiful. It says, you are a book, an unfinished work of literature, an archive of descriptive history, and you liken organisms to books that describe ancient worlds if we just know how to read them. So talk me through the core message of this book.
I suppose nobody could have guessed that a blood sample or a saliva sample could tell you so much. And similarly, old-fashioned fingerprints, I mean, as used by detectives, it's amazing how much information is concealed, is ready there to be read. And it occurred to me that because an animal is naturally selected, and because the detailed perfection of animals is so striking, especially when you look at the outside crust of an animal, the skin of an animal, a camouflaged animal really does appear to have its environment, or rather its ancestors' environment, painted on its back, something like a moth sitting on tree bark, and it's got a beautiful painting of tree bark on its back, painted by natural selection of its ancestors. And it occurred to me that this detailed perfection of painting of the environment cannot just be limited to the outside skin of the animal. It must pervade every detail of the inside of the animal, every molecule inside, every gene inside should be readable in the future by a zoologist of the future and read the environment in which the animal's ancestors lived, and therefore natural selection painted it, inside as well as out.
I love this idea that it allows us to become like time travelers.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Yes.
And that we can look back and try and understand these past worlds that organisms were living in. And as you say, we can see it in the camouflage, we can see it when we look at an animal, but what you're talking about is that it's actually written in our DNA.
Yes, and I feel a little bit of a fraud because it can't be done yet. I mean, today you can do it with the outside skin of the animal, but in the future it will be done with the DNA.
And I think this is something which I find as a geneticist that a lot of people don't realize, that we still don't know a lot about what our DNA does.
No.
and how we can read the DNA of organisms, but we don't necessarily know what all of it means yet.
So genetics has leapt ahead and embryology is lagging behind, and it's a more difficult problem. Yeah.
And the other thing I loved about this book is it talks about how a scientist can sort of reverse engineer an animal's traits by, we can uncover the environments that shape these ancestors, and we can see these past worlds in how the organisms look now. And that's both, as we've been saying, at the anatomical, but also at the molecular level. So talk me through this reverse engineering process that you go into. There's a chapter in this book.
Well, some reverse engineering is pretty obvious. You only got to look at the skull of a saber-toothed cat to know that it's a carnivore. And there are similar things that you can look at the gut of an animal. If it's got a short gut, it's probably a carnivore. It's got a very long gut with complicated side passages, it's probably a herbivore, that kind of thing. And I do have a chapter on that. But again, the zoologist of the future, I call her SOF, S-O-F, so I'm a scientist of the future, will be able to do it with genes. And, well, one way it might work is this, and it's not been done yet, but here's what it might happen. There's a technique called GWAS or GWAS, I'm not sure how you pronounce it anyway, which medical researchers use, and they will look at all those people who have a certain disease and all those people who don't have the disease and try to spot some genes which the ones who have the disease have and the ones who don't have the disease don't. And therefore it's much more sophisticated than that, but to pinpoint genetic susceptibilities to disease by looking statistically at who has the gene and has the disease and who hasn't. And my suggestion is what I call IGWAS, interspecies genomic, whatever it is, genome-wide association study, where you might take, for example, all those animals that live in water or go into water. So let me take mammals that go into water. So you've got beavers, you've got water shrews, you've got yapoks, which are kind of water opossums, you've got water tenrecs, and you can compare them with their land-dwelling equivalents. And what you will do is look for a gene which all those water animals have in common, and all the land animals, perhaps preferably even desert animals, don't have. And so you're doing the equivalent of GWAS, but it's interspecific. I think that should work, and I'd like to encourage young zoologists to do it. I'm too old to do it.
And I think I thought that was a really genius idea, really, because, as you say, if you take animals that are all aquatic versus ones that are land and presumably flight, then hopefully you're looking for little bits of their genomes that they share in common that other animals don't have. Though we will presumably have, and you talk about this in your book, pseudogenes, so genes that are from the aquatic environment, because we all eventually go back to aquatic organisms, that might still be found across other animals.
You could look out for them. There are genes, for example, echolocation. Bats and whales, and toothed whales, dolphins, use echoes to find their way around. In the case of bats and toothed whales, it's very, very sophisticated. You could say, actually, they see with their ears, because they can analyze the echoes from their own cries in such detail that it's kind of equivalent to seeing. They must have a model of the world which is built up by echoes. And there is a protein, and therefore a gene, which bats and toothed whales have in common and nothing else has. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for.
Yeah. Now, you use a series of wonderful examples in this book. I mean, it is absolutely rich with sort of detail of the evolutionary histories of various organisms. And you use them to illustrate specific adaptations to reflect these evolutionary pressures that they've been under. And you talk about convergent evolution, so where unrelated develop these similar traits, so like around echolocation. Now, what's your favorite example of an organism whose genetic book provides particularly fascinating insights, do you think? Or is there an organism that you would love to know about the genome?
Yes, well, I think echolocation is a very good one. There's a picture in the book of all those birds which do a distraction display. And it's quite amazing because the distraction display is done by ground nesting birds like lapwings and plovers and things like that, where the adult bird lures a predator like a fox away from its nest. So it will stick out one wing as though it's broken and will limp away from the nest, luring the predator away from the nest because the predator thinks that it's broken its wing, and then at the last minute it takes off. Well, that's remarkable enough that any species should do that, but it's evolved independently, convergently, many dozens of times in different groups of ground nesting birds. And there's a picture of the entire family tree of all birds, showing the distribution in red all around this family tree of where the distraction display has arisen. It's arisen, I haven't counted it, but it must be 20 or 30 times independently in different groups of birds. And I would love to do an IGWAS on that and see whether there's a genetic, whether these birds that do this had independently, convergently evolved it, whether they've all got a gene in common. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
That would be amazing. I mean, one of the things I found so fascinating was whales. I hadn't realized about how whales and where they fall in the evolutionary tree. And yeah, that was a new one to me, and I should know that one. So
when I first heard about this, it's relatively recent. It was discovered in the late 20th century that whales, all whales, including dolphins, are actually even-toed ungulates. They spring right from the middle of the cow, sheep, camel, giraffe family. They're actually most closely related to hippos. So the most closest cousin of a hippo, obviously it's another hippo, but outside that, the closest cousin of a hippo that's not a hippo is a whale, is all whales. Who could possibly have forecast that? This is absolutely certain now. The molecular evidence is absolutely cut and dried. The common ancestor of whales and hippos is right in the middle of the artiodactyls, right in the middle of the even-toed ungulates. It's not as though it's sort of, I mean, it'd be one thing if you could say that whales were related to all of the artiodactyls. So all the artiodactyls go that way and the whales go that way. They're right in the middle of the even-toed ungulates, right in the middle of the cloven-hoofed animals. They don't have hoofs to cleave, but nevertheless, they are related, not just related to them, but right in the middle of them. Now that you could not have possibly guessed. And that came from molecular evidence.
And I think that's one of the lovely things that we now have these days, is that obviously up until now, or until the last sort of few decades, is people have just been looking at morphology and trying to understand about how animals are related to one another and how they evolved in the family trees of that. And these days we can add that molecular evidence to it, which of course I find incredibly exciting.
Yes, and in a way it's not surprising that it's so powerful, because whereas in morphology you've just got a few characters, in molecular biology, either proteins or DNA, you've got massive quantities of evidence, because it's script, it's literature. And so you really can quantify, you really can count the number of DNA bases in common.
Yes.
And that's not a thing you can do with morphology. With morphology, you can say, well, it looks pretty similar. Yes, it looks roughly the same. But you can't actually count in such a watertight way.
I think that's something that I do it with humans, and this is where people are doing it now with species. Is there a particular species that you would love to have the DNA sequences done so you could see where it fits into the tree?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think nowadays it's so quick and cheap to get a DNA sequence that it won't be long before we've sort of pretty much done it, yes.
Yeah, so there's not an animal or an organism where you go, oh, I'd love to know where they fit in. I mean, the whale thing completely threw me, because I was
Yes,
like, oh
I'm
my
not
goodness.
sure whether there are any really big surprises like that coming. I suppose lampreys and hagfish, which are vertebrates but not yet fish, so to speak.
Yeah.
They would be. And I'm sure it's been done.
May have been done, and see where
Yes.
they fit in the tree. So I remember reading The Selfish Gene when I was an undergraduate. I mean, it was one of the books that was kind of suggested to us in the course that I was doing. And you're now nearly 50 years on from publishing that. And I think it's still not something that's widely sort of understood, I suppose, by the general public, that evolution and selection happens at this molecular level. And this is what you're talking about in this gene. And you talk about this thing about how the selfish gene could equally have been called the cooperative gene, in that it's actually a collection of genes that are working together in concert in different organisms. And just like the first sentence is really lovely, you have this last sentence that says, "You are the incarnation of a great, seething, scrambling, time-traveling cooperative of viruses." So poetic again, makes me suddenly feel like I've been taken over by aliens, I have to say, but fascinating really. So talk us through that, because this is the kind of in the last part of the book you're talking about is not just single genes, it's loads of genes working together in concert.
Yes. That last chapter is one of my friends who criticized the book for me. She was rather worried about that one, and she wanted me to cut that chapter out. I call it the sting in the tail of the book. The cooperative gene is relatively easy. I mean, I've been talking about that for years. In my vision of life, we are survival machines created by our genes for their own survival. So each animal body is a machine, is a kind of robot machine, which is built by the genes that ride inside it. And if the body survives to reproduce, then the genes that ride inside it survive. And so natural selection favors genes that are good at building bodies. But no gene can build a body on its own. A body has to be built by a tremendous cooperative effort of all the genes in the body. And that means all the genes in the species, because the species is the unit within which the genes are reassorted and shuffled and scrambled in sexual reproduction. So every gene in you has had to cooperate with every other gene in the gene pool, which is the species, the genes of all the species. And pool is a very good word. Gene pool is a very good phrase to use, because it is just like stirring a pool of water. Sexual reproduction stirs the gene pool. And so each individual body is a random sum, not random, is a sample of the genes in the gene pool. And so the genes have got to be good at cooperating with the other genes in the gene pool, because they keep meeting each other in successive generations as they march down through the generations. So the main ecology in which a gene has to work, the main environment which surrounds a gene and in which it has to survive, is the other genes in the gene pool, the other genes in the species. So although we biologists tend to look on the outside of the animal and say this is a desert animal or this is a marine animal, that's the ecology we think of. But the more important part of the gene's ecology is the other genes in the gene pool. So that's the cooperative gene, and that's a relatively easy thing to explain. The thing about viruses, the sting in the tail, is more difficult. If you ask yourself, think about a parasite, two sorts of parasites. One kind of parasite aspires to get into the future by passing sideways, laterally, like being sneezed out and then breathed in by the next victim, or coughed out and breathed in by the next victim, or expelled in cholera, in diarrhea, and then got into the water supply and being contaminated water being drunk by the next victim. That's a laterally spread parasite. But there's another way in which a parasite can get itself into the future, and that is by infecting the gametes, the eggs of the present victim. So if you think about, say, a bacterium or a virus, whose aspiration to get into the next victim, the next host, is to pass longitudinally, not laterally, longitudinally, into the next generation of host, into the host's children. What that means, that parasite, insofar as it can influence the body of the present host that it's in, it will want exactly the same thing as the host's own genes. All the host's own genes want the present host, the present body, to focus on one thing, which is surviving and then reproducing. So everything about the genes in the gene pool is focused upon this aim of survival of the present individual and survival of the children, survival of the offspring. So it must be a good parent, it must be sexually attractive, it must be good at building a nest. All those things are what it needs in order to pass its genes on. Now put yourself in the position of a virus or a bacterium which passes longitudinally down the generations of hosts. It wants exactly the same thing. It wants the host to be sexually attractive, because otherwise it won't have offspring to pass into. It wants the host to survive, obviously. It wants the host to be a good nest builder. It wants the host to be a good parent. So the thing that singles the cooperative gene out as cooperative will apply every bit as much to a virus or a bacterium that passes longitudinally down the generations. So that gives rise to the sort of poetic conceit that our entire genome is a cooperative of viruses. Now, some of them really are viruses that have migrated into the genome, but I'm not talking about them. They're kind of obviously going along with what I'm saying. I'm talking about all the genes, which you could think of as being equivalent to viruses, only if you buy this rather weird way of thinking which I possess.
So why was your friend worried about this chapter?
Because she thought I was trying to make a contribution to the science of virology, which I really wasn't. I was really trying to make a contribution to a kind of poetic imagination of what we mean by a virus.
Does it give you a bit of an existential crisis? Because I was reading this and going, oh my goodness, I'm just this collection of viruses that are just kind of being passed out.
That might have been part of what worried her as well.
But let me go on to this next one. So you coined the term meme at the time of The Selfish Gene, when that came out, about cultural transmission of ideas. Now, that's obviously analogous to the transmission of genes over time and in populations. Did you ever imagine, when you wrote that book, just how big the word meme would become?
Well, it's become big in the wrong direction. The point about my point about memes is that there's nothing necessarily special about DNA as the replicating entity which you have to consider when talking about evolution in the more general sense. I believe that The Selfish Gene, the book The Selfish Gene, by the way, I mean, I'm actually now under pressure from the publisher to write a new preface for the 50th anniversary. Yeah. And so what I'm think I'm trying to say is that although the book was written 50 years ago, it could have been written 100 years ago, because it is a logical, it follows logically from the neo-Darwinian synthesis of the 1930s, when people first realized that what is really happening in evolution is the differential survival of genes in gene pools. Some genes become more numerous in the gene pool and their alleles become less numerous. Once you've got that, then to personify the gene, as I did, to personify the gene and say, put yourself in the position of a gene trying to maximize its own reproductive success, and the whole thing follows. Well, I've also tried saying in this epilogue, is going to be probably an epilogue actually to the 50th anniversary edition. The book could also be written on any planet in the universe where there is life, because I believe, and I've stuck my neck out and said this before, that wherever there is life, it's got to be Darwinian life. There's no other way in which life can arise. So on any planet where there is life, it will be Darwinian, and that means there will have to be self-replicating entities. I think you can pretty much predict that it'll have to have a genetics, and the genetics will have to be digital, because only digital genetics has high enough fidelity to do the job of providing the basis for evolution. So we need to talk about evolution, natural selection, not only in terms of DNA, but in terms of anything self-replicating, where the self-replicating entities exert some kind of power over their probability of being replicated. And that's exactly what DNA does. It exerts power via the processes of embryology to ensure its own replication, and those genes which are successful are the ones that have good effects on embryology, good effects on bodies via embryology. By good, I mean good for the gene itself, but that tends to mean good for all the genes in the genome because of the cooperative gene argument which I put earlier. So, on any other planet, you will, if there is life on other planets, and I bet there is, if there is life on other planets, then it will be Darwinian life, it will have digital genetics, but it won't be DNA. It would be very unlikely to be DNA. It would be something else. And in order to try to make that vivid, I wanted to think of something pretty different from DNA. And I came up with the meme, which is the unit of cultural inheritance. I think I used the phrase, we don't have to go to other planets. There may be a new replicator staring us in the face on this planet. And the meme is the unit of cultural inheritance. So things like clothes fashions, things like crazes at school. I think we all remember in our school days, there would be a craze for a particular kind of toy or a particular game or maybe a particular slang word that the school has and other schools don't have, or something like that. The backwards-facing baseball cap is one of my least favorite examples. It's infectious. It's copied. Yeah. Anything that's copied, anything that spreads like an epidemic. A school craze spreads just like a measles epidemic through the same school. Not that you have that nowadays, thank goodness, but okay, a flu epidemic. And you could do the same sort of epidemiological study as epidemiologists do on spread of viruses through a thing like an environment like a school. And words that don't mean anything, like basically. The word basically crops up all the time. And it means nothing at all. Yeah. It means the same thing as By the way, when I went to Japan, I kept on hearing people saying, ano, ano, ano. And so I asked a Japanese, what does ano mean? And he said, it means Anyway, there are such words, actually, I think I could say all words are memes, in fact, but the obvious, the easiest one to think of is something like basically, or like. That's obvious. There's no doubt about it that there are memes that spread. The epidemiology could be worked on, indeed has been worked on. And what's more interesting is, in order to make the analogy come to life properly, some memes have to have high survival value. They have to have high spreadability. Notice that it doesn't have to mean they make the individual possessing them survive better. And that's true of genes as well. We don't necessarily say that a gene spreads because it has good effects on bodies. Most of them do, but some don't. And there are some genes that spread because they have good effects purely for the good of the gene itself. There are genes called segregation distorters, which actually have as their effect not a good effect on a body, but an effect making them more likely to get into a gamete. As you know, the process of making gametes, making sperms and eggs, meiosis, is set up so that any gene has an exactly 50% chance of getting into each gamete. But there's certain genes called segregation distorters whose phenotypic effect is to bias the production of gametes so that they are more likely to get into a gamete than the 50%, which is the fair distribution. So they bias the deal, and they spread more rapidly by underhand criminal means. Similarly, in the case of memes, we don't have to say that a meme spreads because it's good for the individual who spreads it. Nobody's saying that using a particular clothes fashion benefits you as an individual. It might, but in order for the analogy to hold, all it has to do is benefit itself. So the backwards baseball hat spreads by virtue of its self-spreading. It doesn't have to. You don't have to say that it's benefiting the individual. So the science of memetics would be looking at the spreadability of memes, like crazes, like words, like fashions for hairstyles, that kind of thing. There is a science of memetics. There are even journals of memetics. And you could talk about, in the same way as cooperative genes, so the cooperative gene which spreads because of cooperation, because of mutual compatibility. You could say the same thing of cooperative memes, and I've suggested that organized religions could be regarded as meme complexes or memeplexes, so that something like the meme for believing in life after death spreads in cooperation with other memes belonging to a certain church. The meme for the belief that if you depart from your religion, you get killed, that obviously has high survival value for itself, and can be part of a meme complex. So that's the story of memes. And then there's a thing now called an internet meme, which is a subset, and it seems to be a picture with a caption on it, which does indeed spread in the right kind of way to be defined as a meme, and also some of them have high spreadability, some of them have high survival value. So to that extent, it's good. What's not so good is anybody who thinks that that's the only kind of meme that there is.
I think Trump is helping us a lot with memes at the moment, isn't he? We're getting loads from him. Now,
I don't say.
No. So how do you, I mean, you have been writing for nearly 50 years now. How do you hope that the ideas presented in your books will influence future research? You've touched on it a little bit, but in evolutionary biology and genetics, you've talked about this idea of doing sort of GWAS, sort of interspecies. Is there anything else?
Well, I hope that biologists will continue to think in this way, because not all of them do, and there is, indeed, there's a chapter in the Genetic Book of the Dead which discusses opposition. I mean, there's fairly substantial opposition from certain quarters among biologists. I believe because they misunderstand, and so I suppose I would hope that they would be a dwindling band. Maybe some of them here today. I don't know.
So talk me through some of these opposing theories,
well,
because you do talk about
yes,
it in the book.
Yes. One of my Oxford colleagues, Dennis Noble, who is a brilliant physiologist, does brilliant work on the physiology of the heart, applying the theory of the Hodgkin-Huxley theory of the nerve impulse to heart muscle. He says that, and I really pick out one quote from his book, which I go to town on. He says that there's no such thing as a gene for anything. Genes are just useful, like anything else is useful. It's useful for the body. So when the body wants to make a certain protein, which of course it does, it uses as an enzyme, the body then goes to the library, which is the DNA in the nucleus of the cell, and as it were, pulls down the relevant volume, the relevant gene, to make the protein that's required. But the genes themselves have no causal influence. Now, that has a certain superficial appeal, but it is absolute nonsense, because if genes have no causal influence, then natural selection cannot work. Natural selection, at least as understood since the 1930s, in the neo-Darwinian synthesis of Fisher and Haldane and Wright and Julian Huxley and Ernst Mayr and Dobzhansky, natural selection is the differential survival of genes. Genes survive by virtue of their effects on bodies. They have causal effects on bodies. A causal effect means that the difference between a gene and its allele, a gene and its alternative on a chromosome, they have a different effect on the bodies in which they find themselves, and as a consequence of that, the body survives or doesn't survive. The body reproduces or doesn't reproduce. The body is sexually attractive or is not sexually attractive. These are all consequences of the causal influence of genes. If genes didn't have causal influences, you couldn't have natural selection at all. So, although people who take, well, another expression of this fallacy is in the words of Stephen Jay Gould, the late Stephen Jay Gould, who compared the role of the gene in evolution to bookkeeping. Now, a bookkeeper comes along after the event and writes down in a book which transactions have happened. But genes have the causal influence that I've been talking about. And bookkeeping is not just a wrong analogy, it is precisely the wrong analogy. It couldn't be more wrong if it tried. And yet it has obvious superficial appeal. I mean, it's got a kind of resonance. The word bookkeeping, oh yes, bookkeeping, that sounds good, that sounds right. But it just, as I say, it couldn't be more wrong. So I hope that kind of fallacy will disappear. Another one is people think I'm saying that genes are working in isolation from one another, and they don't. I've really already answered that in my little sermon about the cooperative gene.
But also the extended phenotype about how the effect of a gene goes beyond the organism.
Quite, yes. Thank you for mentioning that. The extended phenotype is the title of my second book. It's the only one of my books which is aimed at a professional audience, but I like to think it can be read by lay people as well. The idea is that because we are talking about genes levering themselves into the next generation by the causal effects that they have on bodies, it doesn't have to be on bodies, or not relevantly on bodies. It could be that genes exert their effect outside the body, and they do. If you think about an artifact made by an animal's behavior, like a bird's nest is quite obviously a Darwinian adaptation. It's a device for successful reproduction, and therefore you have to think of it as a device used by genes to propagate themselves into the future. There must be genetic influences on nest shape. You could do a genetic study of nests. You could take weaver birds. Weaver birds in Africa have these elaborate nests, which sometimes they have great big dangling tubes to foil snakes and things like that. These obviously are evolved adaptations, evolved by natural selection. Some nests were better than other nests at protecting the eggs from snakes and at stopping them falling out and things. So there's obviously been natural selection of nests. That means there's been natural selection of genes for nests of different shape. There's been natural selection of genes for beaver dams, natural selection of genes for the mud tubes that mud-daubing wasps make. Caddis fly larvae build themselves little houses out of stones or twigs or little snail shells. So any animal artifact which helps the animal to survive or to reproduce is an extended phenotype. Phenotype just means the product of the gene. So normally the phenotype would be its legs or its arms or its wings or its antennae. So an extended phenotype is not part of the body, but it is nevertheless a Darwinian adaptation as though it were a part of the body. Well, if you buy that, then the next step in the argument is parasites who live inside a host and manipulate the host to their own advantage. And there are wonderful, rather macabre examples of this. Parasites that have an intermediate host like a snail on the way to a definitive host like a sheep. And so the parasite in the snail needs its snail to be eaten by a sheep, inadvertently presumably, in order to get onto the next stage of its life history. And there are lots of wonderful examples of parasites manipulating their intermediate hosts, that's snails or insects, say, in such a way as to make those intermediate hosts more likely to pass on the parasite to the next host. There are flukes, flatworms, in which one stage in the life history, in the life cycle, lives in an ant. And it burrows into the brain of the ant and makes a lesion in the brain of the ant, which causes the ant to climb to the top of grass stems, where it becomes more likely to be eaten by an ungulate, which is what it wants to be, to get into the next generation. So it's called a brainworm. There are other parasites that of insects where they need the insect to drown itself in water so that the parasite can get out of the insect into the water.
Yeah.
And they cause bees, for example, to dive bomb into the water. So these examples are well known and have been for a long time. And all I'm saying is that the change in behavior of the host is an extended phenotype of the parasite genes, because all adaptation has to come about by genes for things. So we have genes for changes in the host's behavior. A gene for making a bee dive bomb into the water, a gene for making an ant climb to the top of grass stems. It's not the ant's own gene, it's the worm's gene. It's an extended phenotype. Well, parasites don't have to sit inside their hosts. Cuckoos, I have a chapter on cuckoos in this book. Cuckoos are parasites, but they don't live inside the host's body, they live in the nest of the host, and they manipulate the host spectacularly. You have a tiny, tiny wren feeding a gigantic cuckoo, which could swallow it whole. And this wretched wren, but very small birds do this, is working itself to the bone, feeding this hideously large cuckoo nestling. So the change in behavior of the small bird, the host, is an extended phenotype of genes in the cuckoo, because of course the adaptation has to come about by the natural selection of cuckoo genes. Well, cuckoos don't live inside their host, but they live a few inches away from their host. What about an animal that manipulates another animal in the same kind of way as a cuckoo nestling, but doesn't live a few inches away, lives 100 yards away? A male bird, a male songbird singing, or a male dove cooing, bow cooing, causes a female that sees and hears the bow coo display, causes its gonad, its ovary, to grow massively. So the male is manipulating the female by his behavior. He's causing a hormonal change in the female by his behavior. It's been shown in canaries as well, and probably applies to all songbirds. It's been done in canaries. So when a nightingale sings, I like to think of it as drugging a female. John Keats is not a female bird, but he was a vertebrate with a nervous system not unlike that of a female bird. And he was drugged by the nightingale. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk. 1 minute passed, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed. That's how it goes, isn't it? And lethal would have sung. So if Keats could be drugged by the nightingale's song, how much more powerful would the song be to a female nightingale? This is, if I'm right about this is extended phenotype, working the other end of a wood, causing a female nightingale's gonads to swell, to swell, as a consequence of natural selection having worked for generations on the male nightingale's song to perfect its power to exert an extended phenotypic effect on the female nervous system and the female hormonal system.
So you've just done a little bit of poetry there, and I have to say one of the things about this book is that it is beautifully written and beautifully illustrated. And I want to bring in Jana Lenzova, who you worked with in doing the illustrations for this. How did that work in terms of writing and illustrating the book? Because it is absolutely beautiful. If you haven't got this book, go get it. It's beautiful.
Yes. Well, it's not the first book she's illustrated of mine. We did a previous book called Flights of Fancy, which is about which is about flight. And that's even actually more heavily illustrated. I think we work by, I mean, she reads the book and sees what needs to be illustrated, and I make suggestions, which she sometimes follows. So it's very much a cooperative. We actually met because she's also a translator into Slovak, and I met her because she translated an earlier book of mine, The God Delusion, into Slovak, and it turned out quite fortuitously she's a brilliant artist as well.
It is a very, very beautiful book, and I know that Jana's here if you want to talk to her. Well, one of the things, the other thing I loved about this book is that obviously I've read a number of your books over the years, and as I was reading this, you touch on a number of your previous books and a number of sort of theories and things that you've brought forward in these books. So you talk about books being, our DNA is like a palimpsest. It's been overwritten over the years through time. Is this your palimpsest? Is there something you've overwritten? Is there anything you've changed?
It's a good question. The point about palimpsest is, of course, that the genetic book of the dead is all very well saying that the animal is a document. Where you quoted the first sentence, a document describing the ancestral worlds in which its ancestors were naturally selected. But of course, there are ancestors and ancestors going back and back and back. And so the older ones will have contributed to that document, but that will have been partially overwritten by later ones. And so that's what a palimpsest is. That's the easy part of what you've just asked me. The difficult part is you asked me whether that book is itself a palimpsest. And you mean by that is it a sort of summation of earlier books? In part, but you have to read all my books, not just that one.
But I found that this is a lovely introduction. If you haven't read all of your books, because you draw on ideas from your previous books, it's actually a lovely introduction to you and your thoughts, I thought. Is it a summation?
I'll take that, yes. Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay, I've been yakking now, and I know you guys have questions, and I think I'm going to get a little iPad. Here it comes.
I'm rather alarmed to see the
Is it
translators
distracting?
I'm reminded of I think the first time I had
15
this.
to choose from, but you can just pick.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the first time I had translated into sign language, I told a little story which slightly embarrassing, really. I'd been waxing enthusiastic, almost poetic, about my visit to CERN and the Large Hadron Collider, and I was moved to tears by the Large Hadron Collider. And I described this in one of my books. But there was a printer's misprint, and it came out as the Large Hard-On Collider. And I couldn't help looking across at the translator to see it.
Right. Okay, so this one is from Emma. And it's a question that we didn't get through all my questions, but I have a similar one. So do you have any opinion on the ethics of CRISPR technology and its application in deletion of genes coding for disease or disability? I mean, I'm interested because they've been doing this work, these dire wolves, and the fact that they're trying to de-extinct animals. What do you think about the use of CRISPR these days?
Well, I think CRISPR is an immensely important technique, and my scientists of the future will make good use of it. As for the dire wolves, I've come across a good deal of skepticism among people who know that these are not really dire wolves at all.
Hybrids.
And similarly, the project to remake woolly mammoths. It's been said, and I'm not an expert, but it's been said that really all they're doing is picking a few genes which woolly mammoths would have made them woolly and would have made the dire wolves dire.
Yeah.
And put them into existing elephants
Yes.
or wolves.
Yeah.
So to talk about bringing woolly mammoths or direwolves back to life, it probably is possible. I mean, because the entire genome, I think woolly mammoth's entire genome is known.
Yes, it is.
So
Yeah.
with cloning techniques, it should be possible with
To do it.
Edinburgh type sheep techniques.
Yes, indeed.
It should be possible to actually literally bring a woolly mammoth back to life. But the first step is just putting a hairy gene into an elephant.
Yeah. Yes, I have been a little bit kind of, why are they doing this? And what's the ethics of this? And who's choosing which animals to do? Because apparently they're going to go for a dodo and things like that. And I thought,
Well, I don't have the ethical. I mean, I'd like to see it done, but I'm skeptical whether it is being done. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful to have dodos again?
wandering around? Yeah.
Yes.
But it's an interesting one. They seem to go for kind of fluffy, cuddly animals at the moment, it seems. Do you have to be cute to be
Well,
as
I
part
don't
of
know.
this
I think really the choice would be if you can get the DNA and thylacines, Tasmanian wolves. They would be a good one because plenty of museum specimens.
Yeah, specimens of them. Now, Paddy's asked a question which I also had on my list. So, do you think that the recent understanding of epigenetics has changed how you view the concept of the selfish gene or your view on evolution?
I think the word epigenetics is much misused. It really just means embryology. It is obvious because we know that the genes in all our body cells are the same, and yet our body cells are all different. Obviously, it has to be the case that different genes are being turned on in different cells. That is epigenetics. For some reason, the word epigenetics has been hijacked to mean some kind of pseudo-Lamarckism, and the idea that what you do during your own lifetime can influence your children's genes, which can happen in a small way, and it is an epigenetic effect, but the vast majority of epigenetic effects happen within the body in ordinary embryology, and I object to the word epigenetics being hijacked in this way.
I find it quite interesting because I get people who contact me and say, well, I think that my ancestor was a Viking and that's why I have an affinity for the sea. And I have to explain that it doesn't work quite like that. I think there's a public misconception about epigenetics.
Yes, that's a different point. But
Yeah.
Yes.
So Carmel, I'm a biology teacher. If you had to pick one quick example or story to help secondary level students understand the theory of evolution and grab their attention, what would it be?
Well, I suppose everybody's interested in humans, aren't they? And so it probably find that they would be delighted to learn about the rich fossil record that humans. But I think that's rather parochial. I mean, I think that the world is so much larger than just the human world. I'm shortly going to America to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the so-called monkey trial in Tennessee, the trial of John Stokes, who taught evolution. It's called the monkey trial because the only thing that the objectors objected to was the idea that we are descended from monkeys and apes. So I think that is rather parochial because the theory of evolution is so huge, it's so general, it applies to all living creatures, all plants, bacteria, archaea, everything. So I suppose the sheer majesty of the variety of living creatures that have been thrown up by evolution, and yet all written in the same script, all written in the same code. I think that's a remarkable fact and an inspiring fact.
So throughout your wonderful career, what do you consider to be the most beautiful scientific discovery? That's from Anya.
Beautiful scientific discovery. That's...
What do you consider to be the most beautiful scientific discovery?
I'm not sure I've made... I mean, I suppose the extended phenotype, if you mean something that I've done.
Well, it sounds like it just says, what do you consider to be the most beautiful scientific discovery? So I don't know if it's about your career particularly or just generally.
Well, just generally, I suppose the whole molecular biology revolution, I mean, initiated by Watson and Crick and their insight that, it has not escaped our notice that we've immediately discovered a method of pairing. And so much has followed from that. I mean, it is just an astonishing revolution. Peter Meadoworth probably exaggerating a bit when he says it is simply not worth arguing with anybody who denies that this is the most important discovery of the 20th century. But it is remarkable. The discovery that the whole of biology is essentially a branch of computer science. It's digital.
Now then, okay, so do improvements in civilization, such as healthcare, hinder the progress of the collaborative genes, i.e. ineffective genes in the gene pool would previously have been selected out of the gene pool without healthcare? So this is about healthcare altering the course of evolution.
Yes. I suppose it's undeniable that many of us are walking around who wouldn't be walking around but for medical science. And no doubt many people are passing on genes that would not have been passed on but for medical science. And I can live with that. I think it's, I like doctors, and I think it's something which I welcome, and I would not wish to see us return to a state of nature where if you've got bad genes, just suck it up and die.
No, that would be bad. Yeah. You clearly love Darwin. If you could talk to him, is there anything you would ask Darwin?
Yes, this brings back memories. I was once approached by a Japanese television company, film company, who wanted to film an encounter between me and Charles Darwin, and they dressed up an actor as Charles. He was an English actor, not a Japanese actor, and he came to my door, knocked on my door, and I opened the door. Mr. Darwin, an honor to meet you. The idea was not that I should ask him questions, but that I should bring him up to date. And that's what they wanted. And so what I was supposed to tell him, what I did tell him, was that was about genetics. Because the one thing that Darwin got wrong, just about the only thing he got wrong, actually, maybe literally the only thing he got wrong, is genetics.
Yeah.
And he knew the genetics of his time, which was all wrong, except for Mendel, who got it right, but
wasn't terribly well known.
Wasn't well known. So I explained to Darwin in his avatar, his actor avatar. He was very well made up, by the way. There was a makeup woman constantly hovering around him to stick on bits of makeup that were falling off all the time.
Disconcerting.
And anyway, I explained to him the problem had been that in Victorian times the genetics that was known to people was blending inheritance. So it was thought that we were all a kind of mixture of father and mother's characteristics, as though you were mixing paint.
Yeah.
So if you mix red paint and blue paint, you get purple paint. And no amount of purple mixing with purple will reconstitute the original red and blue. And that was thought to be a problem. It was written down in a hostile article in the Edinburgh Review by an engineer called Fleming Jenkin, that natural selection isn't possible because there wouldn't be enough variation. When you think about it, that's not just an objection to natural selection, it's an objection to obvious facts. We are not more uniform than our grandparents were.
No.
Which we should be if that was... Anyway, but it did worry Darwin at the time, and I had to explain to him that because genes are particulate, you either get a particular gene or you don't get it from any given parent. And you pass it on to each child or not, as the case may be. They don't blend, they don't mix. So I explained this to this actor. He did it very well. He did it sort of, yes, that's it.
I was going to say, was he suitably impressed?
Yes.
Now, there's a sweet one. Have you got a favorite meme from the past few years? Do you follow memes, really?
I saw one just yesterday that I rather liked, but I've completely forgotten what it was. It was all you need to know about it was anti-Trump, and therefore a good thing.
He's giving us a lot of memes at the moment. So let's have a look. So when you mention the scientist of the future, is there anyone up and coming who you are excited to see what they produce in the future?
Do you want me to name a young...
Apparently.
I don't think I can do that.
Okay.
What I can say, I do assume she's female.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just a matter of courtesy. When I don't go in for this he or she construction, I just say she. And if I were female, I would say he. Okay.
If you could put your hand on the tiller of human evolution.
On what?
If you could put your hand on the tiller of human evolution, how would you choose to change us?
Well, the hand on the tiller could be done in two ways. You can either do it by manipulating selection or by manipulating mutation, the candidature of evolution. And the tiller, manipulating the tiller has been done to a huge extent in farm animals and farm plants, in garden plants, in domestic animals, domestic dogs. It's really astounding when you think about it that a Pekingese thinks it's a wolf. And its ancestors were wolves not that long ago. So that's a very powerful hand on the tiller effect. And it's never been done on humans. I mean, Hitler tried it briefly, but it's pretty much never been done. We are enormously changed environmentally, in terms of hairstyle and that kind of thing, and growing moustaches and beards and or not. But we've never practiced the kind of selection that gives rise to different breeds of dogs and cabbages.
I suppose CRISPR is now creeping into
yes,
this,
but
like
that's gene manipulation.
Yes,
that's manipulating the genes themselves, and that's it's a little bit odd in a way to talk about that kind of hand on the tiller when we've never even tried the other kind. Thank goodness. But yes, it's perfectly possible to use either kinds of hand on the tiller, and they would work. But I don't really think I want to do it.
Yeah, it's an interesting and difficult ethical area, I think.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts about AI and its applications on biology or science as a whole? As IA is already applied in biology softwares like AlphaFold to better visualize proteins, is AI helping, you think, in terms of understanding biology?
Yes, I've been enormously impressed. I mean, long ago, I remember reading Alan Turing's criterion for whether we would how we would decide whether a machine was intelligent, and his criterion was that we would be unable to distinguish if we were sitting in a room with in those days it would have been a teleprinter, and you're communicating with a teleprinter to somebody or something in another room. And if you can't tell whether it's a machine or a human, then that's past the Turing test. And I have had a number of conversations with one of the modern AI programs, ChatGPT, and for me, it passes the Turing test with flying colours. I asked ChatGPT to write a sonnet about evolution. It produced a very adequate sonnet, so I asked it to write another one. It produced another sonnet, quite different, but also on evolution. I asked it to write a third one, and it produced a third sonnet. Instantly, by the way, correct sonnet form, and I felt a bit sorry for it. I mean, I didn't like to ask a fourth time. I felt
It's going, what again?
And I also genuinely wanted to write a computer program to solve a problem for me. And I haven't programmed computer for about 20 years now. Well, I used to do it a lot, and I've now forgotten how to. So I asked ChatGPT if it could write me a program. It did. The program failed, but nevertheless, the dialogue that I had with it showed that it absolutely understood precisely what I wanted. And I think I'm not sure that many humans would have understood the way I expressed it. I probably didn't express it very well. And I've done that several times. And in all cases, the program hasn't worked. But I've been hugely impressed by the conversation that I've had about it. I've been less impressed with factual knowledge. I asked ChatGPT, for some reason, the subject of Helen Spurway came up. Helen Spurway was a geneticist who was married to JBS Haldane, and she was quite a well-known geneticist. She died a long time ago. I asked her, I can't remember why she came up, but I was asking ChatGPT about Helen Spurway, and it said, after Haldane died, she married Richard Dawkins. So I said, no, she didn't. And it said, oh, sorry, I got that wrong. She married Aldous Huxley. That was also false. And I didn't think much about that. And that was about a year ago, I suppose. And I thought that by now it might have improved a bit. But so yesterday, day before yesterday, I thought, I'd just try again. I said, do you know the name Helen Spurway? And it said Helen Spurway was a distinguished geneticist. And I said, who was she married to?
Did he get it right?
Helen Spurway was married to Richard Dawkins.
Oh dear. Well, I think on that, I have been told that we absolutely are supposed to finish at 1:45. So I have to say a tremendous thank you for absolute pleasure in being able to chat to you this evening.
Thank you very much. Where do I go? Okay, fine.